Good morning, Daniel Sloss. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
It's a pleasure to talk to you. It really is. I am mad about all of your stuff. So to get to chat to you, I know I'm having a little bit of a sycophantic moment, but you've been on the comedy scene since you were about 17 years old. So what was an early Daniel, like a baby Daniel Sloss like?
Overly confident, which I still am, but back then I had less evidence that I had any right to be that confident. I think when I started when I was about 16, 17, and I just had the arrogance of youth. So I was like, there's no way this shouldn't go well. Why would it not? And thankfully that, you know, when a teenager walks on stage, I looked very young. And I think the audience had such low expectations of me that it was quite easy to surpass those.
Well, was it weird for you? Because you were so young, your parents had to drive you to your comedy gigs and they'd be at them. So was that not strange?
Yeah, I mean, they watched my parents watched each of my first, I'm going to say 40 or 50 sets. And from those routines, they could work out where I was in life. Like, they'd be sitting there being like, okay, so he doesn't have a girlfriend, but at least he's enjoying school by the sounds of things. He obviously does exactly what we thought he was doing in his own bedroom, but it's a bit more in our face now, I guess. And then like after 3 months, I guess there must have been one day when they were like, oh, he's not a virgin anymore. And he's discovered marijuana. This is okay. Well, as long as he's happy and confident. And I remember one time my lovely grandmother, who I love so very dearly, came to see my 7th or 8th gig, and I spent 5 minutes on stage speaking about exactly what you would expect a 17-year-old to talk about on stage. And when we were driving back in the car, she didn't say anything for about 7 or 8 minutes, but she was trying to be supportive because she's lovely, and the only thing she could say was, "You were very confident."
And Daniel, that is something like you're not afraid to talk about certain things, and you've never been afraid to talk about things. Do you think comedians we've maybe got to a stage where everything has gone maybe a little bit too politically correct, or you're afraid to go into certain areas?
No, absolutely not.
No, not for you. There you go.
No. Cancel culture in comedy, as far as I'm concerned, is a myth that is used by comedians to sort of sell their terrible comedy more. If there's this sort of threat of, oh, they're trying to get rid of me, they're trying to cancel me, they're not going to let me say this again. What are you talking about? The only comedians that have ever actually been cancelled are in like India and Russia, and they're dead now. That's being cancelled for comedy. Being yelled at online because you told a rubbish joke doesn't mean you were cancelled. Louis C.K. is on tour. Bill Cosby isn't in jail. Who has been cancelled in comedy? What are you talking about? Jimmy Carr has been cancelled 15 times in the past 7 years, and last time I checked, he's still on tour.
Well, there we go.
No,
I love a rant.
I think
I love a rant at 9:20.
It's a really good point. You know, watching your shows where you have done comedy about your lovely sister, Rosie, passed away when she was 7. She had cerebral palsy. You've done comedy about that, about Hitler, about almost everything. But the jokes are so well constructed that I think everyone joins along with you. Is that kind of an issue that you're like, you just didn't do the joke right?
Correct. I think, you know, the only reason taboo subjects are taboo is because people do not talk about them. And you can talk about anything on stage. This idea that you can't say anything. I have done jokes about murder, sexual assault, paedophilia, the Holocaust, abortion, murder, death, disability, everything. I've not been cancelled for any of those things. I've had some feedback from people who are close to those subjects saying that perhaps my attitudes towards them were maybe ignorant, which they probably were at the time. And then what happens there is you take that feedback and you apply it to the stand-up. If you're talking about something that is taboo and is likely to upset someone, you have a responsibility to deliver that to the people who are the victims of that in a way that they find it palatable. And if you don't do that, that's not the audience's fault. You failed. It's the equivalent of a chef coming out and yelling at every patron for getting food poisoning. You poisoned them, you idiot. Your job is to cook it properly and sell it properly, and you're allowed to fail. And I'll defend any comedian's right to make any joke about any subject. Anything can and should be joked about. But that does not leave you free of criticism to people going, you shouldn't have done a joke about that because you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. And that was insensitive. Those are valid criticisms.
Yeah.
People are allowed to be offended by comedy. Yes, they are. If you bring up a topic that's affected someone, you don't get to choose how they react to being reminded of that in the safety of a comedy club.
Amen.
There we go. Wow. That's a great answer. Listen, Daniel, we have to talk about this because Muireann, as you said, watched one of your specials last night. Jigsaw. Now, are these facts true? 120,000 relationships have been the catalyst of at least 300 divorces because of your routine. 120,000 relationships
have ended.
And 300 divorces because of you.
I got a message last night from a woman who was engaged. They watched Jigsaw. She's no longer engaged and she's happier than she's ever been.
Daniel, what is in this show that is causing all this to happen?
The truth.
Oh, we're just saying so many women laughing very loudly there going, I know that feeling.
Yeah. It was never meant to be a show that inspired as many breakups as it did. It was always meant to be a love letter to single people in a way. I come out of a very toxic relationship, and the relief of getting out of those relationships is so good that I was like, I just have to share this with people. You know, you don't have to settle for someone just because we were raised by a generation who married their next door neighbors because transport hasn't been invented yet. Like, there's this, like, oh, I married my high school sweetheart. All right, Stockholm syndrome from a very young age. I have access to the actual world. You believe your soulmate was born 20 miles from where you live. Are you insane? Travel, experience the world, go see new things. And it was never meant to break couples up. It was just meant to highlight to people in toxic relationships that they didn't have to be in those. And then it just snowballed, man. Like, at first it was after shows, people would come and tell me they'd broken up with their partners, and I'd laugh at that because that's obviously hilarious. And the first thing I would always do is I would always ask, are you better for it? And the answer 100% of the time is yes. I've never broken up. Like, people get upset when they hear how gleeful I am in these breakups. They're like, you're so sick, you're still happy that you enjoy the misery you cause. I'm not causing misery to two people. I'm causing misery to one narcissist who doesn't know how much of an annoying person they've been for their entire relationship. It's not as if two old people who've been married for 50 years stick on my Netflix special, look at pictures of all the kids,
and break
all
up.
the grandkids, yeah, and suddenly go, you know what? The Scottish alcoholic's right. I don't love it. Maybe we should just tell the kids that it's all over. It's people in horrible relationships going, oh, you suck. You suck so much. And it took seeing this person for me to realise that I am infinitely better than you. And I only see that as a positive.
Oh, I just want people. It was so good, so funny. I absolutely adored it. There's so many things we want to talk about. I know since you've done that comedy special, you're getting married next year, you've got a baby, all that kind of stuff. But as you, Alan,
you're coming to Ireland.
I am.
You're going to break up. You're going to break up all the relationships in Ireland now.
No, I fully believe now that Jigsaw's out, anyone that comes to my show, I'm like, surely you're in the right relationship. Otherwise, just go watch it again. It's a special that you can watch more than once a year. Find out. Test it every time.
You could do that, but your new tour can't. That's going to be coming to Ireland very soon. What's going on, Daniel?
Well, I mean, I just finished my last tour, Hubris, about a month ago. It should have ended sooner, but because of COVID rescheduling and everything, we had to do the rescheduled dates this year. So I'm in the process of writing a new show. And at the same time, as you said, I've just had a kid, and I'm desperately trying to avoid writing material about my son and being a father. Because for me personally, as a massive fan of stand-up comedy, I think that when any comedian becomes a parent, their stand-up tends to go down. and it's because it's just the most relatable thing in the world. When I see comedians that I love doing material about being a dad, it's like watching a really good footballer go to play in America. You're like, you've given up. You're at the end of your career. It's just about the money now. You're going to go out to a place where it's way easier, much easier to score a goal, and you just want the paycheck and and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're no longer in the conversation for greatest to ever do it.
How can people get tickets? You're in the Millennium Forum, Waterfront, Vickers Street, and the Comedy Festival in Leisureland in Galway. How can people get tickets?
They can go to danielsloss.com, but as always, please do not buy tickets to my show based off of this interview. I am not allowed to swear on television. Go and watch the specials on Netflix, and if they even mildly upset you, don't waste your time. Don't come anywhere near me. I don't want to look at your miserable face while I F and Jeff around the room and you're like, oh, this isn't how it should be done. Stay away. Do your research.
Brilliant.
Daniel Sloss, an absolute... I wish we had filmed, because when our researcher was talking to you yesterday, you were talking about how when you first started out, you basically just copied Ed Byrne because he was such an influence when I wish we still had that. Do you have video of that?
There is. So if you watch my my first ever time on television, I think I was about 17 or 18 years old, and it's on the Paul O'Grady show. And because I'd watched Irish comedy in general, but Ed Byrne particularly was, and still is, my hero, I would watch his stand-up and then go into school the next day and in a probably offensive Irish accent, I apologise, would just repeat his material to my friends, being like, this is what I saw last night. So when I started doing stand-up, and you can see it in the Paul O'Grady show, I'm just doing an Ed Byrne impression. I'm just a 17-year-old, same cadence, same diction, because that to me at the time was the funniest way to do stand-up.
I am Googling that directly after this show. Daniel Sloss is going to be in Vickers Street on the 29th of October in Dublin, and the Galway Comedy Festival on the 30th of October. Daniel Sloss, it has been a pleasure talking to you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Thanks a million, Daniel.